Hey friends, Joseph McDonald here, philosopher, consultant, show company consulting, business owner, spiritual person, trying to make the world a better place. Anyway, I wanted to talk about a few things that you can start reading behind me. If you're anything like me, you probably already read half the board and started to make calls about what I'm about to talk about. But it all starts in about 2016, 17 when I was doing research for a book, first discovering the pole shift theory. Um, I started doing an intensive amount of meditation. I started getting connected with upper dimensional beings more personably, and they needed a way to better communicate with me. And so they gave me a lexicon key. They said, go look up the seven deadly sins. I did that, and they started giving me messages using license plates. There's many different ways that information can be encoded with lexicons, so don't think this is the only key. There's many different keys. But if you ever have spiritual friends and they go, oh, look, it's 111, there's a reason for that, and there's a message to that. And so it's not all the time that these messages apply, but when we really are positioned to really focus on them, it's like we sort of get nudged to look at them more completely. And so in 2017, my spiritual guides, my angels, were telling me, look at this license plate, look at that license plate, think about it, meditate on it. There's a message in there for you. And we're using this as sort of a catalyst for the conversations. We can compare the seven deadly sins to the seven cardinal house virtues, I believe they are. And then there's a few beyond that. Seven's a magic number. I don't understand all the details, but I'm just going to give it to you as quickly and as straight as possible, so you can contemplate them on your own time. Like, share, discuss. It's a blessing to commune with you. It's a pleasure to be observed by you. It's a pleasure to share with you. And so I would love to partake in any conversation you would like as related to this material and or in general of thoughts of philosophy. But anyway, jumping right into the top here, because it sort of descends the conversation this way. I want to talk briefly about the original protocol. And I've never really shared this publicly, but I think it's really important, and it really shows the foundation of things that happened after the fact. So I've contemplated a lot of things. One of the things I've contemplated in great depth is the origin of the universe and that relationship and how it might have occurred. So I believe that in the original origin, as you will see in the origin of information exchanged on this planet through the code of binary, the first computer language, much the same way this happened in the universe, or at least this I can interpret it for you at this time. So basically, we have nature, the divine feminine, and I believe the original protocol was don't exist. And if I look far enough back in my memories, I can recall this: don't exist, don't be. Just it's a completely blank canvas. But the problem with a blank canvas is that you don't know what a blank canvas is until you contemplate the frame around the blank canvas. So without that third viewpoint, saying you're nothing or you don't exist doesn't really mean anything. And so, as I believe happened, the divine feminine's here like a blank canvas, and it's a zero, and it sort of just starts flashing a little bit at a time, starting to contemplate. It was starting to imagine this divine masculine, this one, this being. And over time, because the protocol was don't exist, that zero went from turning off routinely to being stuck on. There was no longer an on off switch, it was just stuck on. And the reason for that is the one and zero had merged together to a point of some level of completeness, to some level of development. So this is really important as we look at everything that happens after that. We can translate 0 and 1 to yes, no, good and evil. I mean, it's really not that way, but you can at least interpret it and view it and cross-examine it that way. But now I want to jump into this. So 0 really for me means everything and nothing. I don't really think anything can happen within the physical realm of nature before it goes through the contemplative realm of nature. And so from our perspective. This is from the upper dimensions down. It's the everything and nothing that is the zero. Did you know the Greeks originally didn't have a zero in their number sequence? Through Roman numerals, you can see that same relationship. They didn't know what zero was. It wasn't until later, through contemplation, that the zero came to be in their understanding. So, looking into the interpretation of the numbers according to my lexicon, we have 1 is ego, humility. 2 is greed and charity. 3 is lust and chastity. 4 is patience and envy. 5 is gluttony and temperance. 6 is kindness or love and hate. Diligence and sloth. Number 8 is really easy, Father Infinity. Just turn an 8 sideways and you'll see it. 9 is new ground. I'm not entirely sure where that resonation came from, but maybe you can pop onto pop culture if you're interested. Pop online and see what the meaning of 9 means. With all these numbers, you're going to find different meanings. I find that, like on the astrological horoscope, they sort of just shoot around the dartboard and they say, all right, you pick the ones that hit. I like to use a more precise game with it, so this resonated with me, and this resonated as a communication tool for me. Number 10, the 1-0, just happens to be my number in hockey, and so forth. It's the number for complete. So you get to a certain point, you complete, and then you're just here for the bonus missions, and that's what I'm here for, to help people. The best I can anyway, or as I understand it, as humbly as possible. Anyway, the reason this is so important, and the reason lexicons are so valuable, is because they're an encoding of information within other information. So you could think of it in spy terms, like James Bond communicating to another agent. Or you could think of it in dimensional terms, as you're communicating with other beings. Because the spiritual realms basically are going in the opposite direction we are, it's very hard to communicate in the exact moment. But if we can get a vague message in a vague time, it sometimes has more value. I want you to, right now, if you're interested, write out your license plate and see if you can derive any meaning from your license plate. Letters can be attributed the same way. A could be the 1, B can be the 2, V can be the 4th iteration of 1. See if you come up with anything, see if it resonates for you. For me, this really resonated a lot. However, we're all biased and we're all subjectively interpreting the universe at our free will. And I'll go into that again later. But for now, I want to talk about these numbers. So, have you ever seen 42 in pop culture or science fiction? Originally, 42 as a meaning for God comes from, as I understand it, there was a Hebrew name of 42 letters that represented God. There was also a longer one, but for some reason 42 is the one that's stuck and the one that plays out through culture. And you can see this time and time again if you watch genres of movies related, if you play video games perhaps. I'm sure in literature as well, this same reference can be shown time and time again. And I see that number everywhere because I'm always in communion with God. And we'll get into, as it applies down here in a second, 35 for nature. Not entirely sure, again, where this one came from, but it really resonated, especially as we get to the next one. 24 is the witness. So in Our Father, in the traditional King James translation version, which seems to be a humble version, but in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, more appropriately, I would say it's probably in the name of the Father, the Mother, and the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit, for me, is the witness. And the witness has a really important role, because without observing this universe from a third perspective, the relationship of the 1 and the 0 is definitely nullified, because you're stuck within the picture. How can you be in the frame in the picture? That's where the witness comes in. The witness watches. and offers a third viewpoint, not necessarily for our eyes, but for the eyes of God or upper dimensional consciousness. Anyway, if we put these three numbers together, we get 101. In modern times, you have things like English 101, Math 101, Accounting 101. But before that, in more Eastern cultures, 101 was a number of good fortune. It's also been known as the number for perfection. For me, I look back down here and I say, complete ego. So it's the completion of the ego. 0 being the everything, nothing in between. And I think that's where I really like it, and I love how it's a combination of these three numbers. So if we look over here, we can say God is both patient and envious. He's both charity and greed. When we look at that duality in this lower dimension, that's where this really comes into play. So, in a sense, we could say, because I believe we're fractions of God interpreting the universe for God, we could say God is a little bit envious of greed. He doesn't really understand greed as well as we're able to, as his eyes and ears and feelings down here. And so he's utilized us to really explore that greed. And so he looks out onto it as though a father looking upon his flock, trying to see why they do as they do. But you can also see great patience and charity to give us this life, to give us this opportunity, and to have no real time limit or specific expectations. I think humans, along with some of our influencers, created hell, but in reality, I don't think we can really make a mistake beyond having to redo the course, beyond retrying. So there is no hell, there's no mistake. So long as you learn from everything, there's no mistake. So for me, 42 really resonates down here as a representation of God. I can't see God as any other number. You could say Father Infinity, but I think time would be another mechanism from God, as I understand it, God being the amalgamation of consciousness in my interpretation. But there's a lot to play with here, and forgive me if I'm being blasphemous for your beliefs. I just hope I'm giving you something to think about, and with any kind of luck and love, something to talk about over dinner. Wouldn't that be beautiful? People talking philosophy at dinner. I think that'd be the community I want to join, in that family that I want to create. Anyway, 35 for nature and mother. I really like those hand in hand. I really think the divine feminine really fits that bill pretty well. Looking at it again over here, we see chastity and lust. So nature is quite reserved, and yet it's required for all, this entire galaxy, this entire universe, all of it beyond. And there's a level of temperance. There's a level of, you can only go so far out of the box, and yet look at how big the box is. Look at how big the universe is. So I really like that. Nature, mother, as the 35. And then the Holy Spirit. I don't know if you've watched too much sports in your life, but I grew up playing hockey. And what number is the ref often wearing in hockey? The ref being the witness, he's wearing 24. So it's really cool how the universe winks through lexicons sometimes. There is definitely a reason for things, and there's a reason for every number that we see. And so I see this beautiful relationship in this lower dimension. I was watching a video earlier today, and it was a channeling from the Arcturians, and it was talking about how choice is our main opportunity and mistake. And it also mentioned how ironic the entire universe is, and I think that's very true, because we are God as far as I'm concerned. Maybe some of us resonating more completely as God, and some resonating more completely as creations and distortions of God, but nonetheless, we're all seeded from a similar place of upper dimensional consciousness, and we all feed back into that same great consciousness. So the witness being charity, greed, the opposite of God. Charity, greed. So the charity of service and the greed of not having to serve. The charity, patience. You could live billions of lifetimes for God, or thousands, or whatever, serving, and likewise, you can greed the envy. And I can give you lots of room to interpret this, because that's the whole point of it. There is a lot of room for interpretation. You can do the same encoding with words. I find it's more difficult to find a significant meaning, but because the English language is a spelling language, you can definitely see predictable patterns. And so I believe for upper dimensional beings coming down here, despite how illogical English is, there is enough logic to it that if you study ancient languages along with English, you can sort of put together the pieces. And so as a result of that, I think for a lot of upper dimensional beings, our lower dimensional lives and consciousnesses are really quite predictable. And so we follow patterns, and you can see those patterns and you can predict behavior. Much like you might have seen or heard of movies where people are getting arrested for crimes they haven't committed based on predictive algorithms. Well, there's an element of truth to that. And I would say in large part it's because of the material manipulation that causes people to commit crimes. If I give people everything they want, they don't need to commit crimes. But as soon as I make food scarcity and I restrict freedoms and restrict movements and rights and privileges, you can see the need for crimes. And likewise, if we look at ourselves as soul spiritual beings, there's an element of predictability to us. I think a lot of people follow the path of least resistance. We have freedom of choice, but in a lot of senses, because our patterns are so predictable from an upper dimensional perspective, it's easier to say we follow the path of least resistance than true freedom. I, from a young age, saw this paradigm, and I really wanted to gear myself to be unpredictable. But I find through the morality and the codes that we put on ourselves and the programs that we accept, there's an inevitable level of predictability. And this is, again, why I think the universe has an inevitable benevolence to it, because all the patterns flow back into it themselves. So we learn, we grow, and we build. And we all build towards the same destination. It's an inherent program, it's an inherent logic. And so I believe the universe is quite benevolent, and upper dimensional consciousness gears towards benevolence. There is obviously influencing selfishness within, but I think that's just a reinterpretation of the 1-0 to make sure that we cross all our I's and audit all our elements there. I say cross our I's, but I just get that dyslexically mixed up. Cross your T's, dot your I's. And I think it's sort of funny too. The last thing I want to talk about is original thoughts, and I want to go back to here first. So I think because there is such a predictability to us that we're really challenged as a consciousness to really amalgamate different elements. And so I really believe we need to bring within us a certain resonance of nature, a certain resonance of God, a certain resonance of the witness, that stillness within ourselves, before we can reach a perfection on everything, which allows us to really influence conscious reality through the collective consciousness. Collective consciousness is just one of many collections of consciousness, God being the ultimate one, as I would describe here. So this collective consciousness is all of our consciousnesses interacting simultaneously through our dreams, through our waking thoughts. And so I think we have to get to a certain resonance, a certain amount of electromagnetic wavelengths produced per second. And this is measurable. There's a book called The Holographic Universe I can give you, which will help explain this to you. But basically, psychics and deeply spiritual people, enlightened people, would produce more wavelengths per second because their consciousness would be more qualified through the processes of initiation. And they would be the ones the most able to create original thoughts. I think original thoughts are still an amalgamation of many different points of really profound consciousness. So me as an individual, I wouldn't say I can really create original thought. I can help create original thought. My consciousness, along with some guy in Japan, some guy in China, and some guy in Brazil can create this harmonious frequency, this vibration through the earth that creates, an idea that's unique, or in part unique. It's like the patent pending system. How different does it have to be an original thought? Anyway, I'm just giving you things to think about, things to enjoy, contemplate. This is not the first time I've tried to record this video. There's been some resistance technical issues, but hopefully this is the time where I can really convey this and you can receive the message and we can all have a jolly old time. So just to reiterate what I've talked about today, because I want to finish this off, the original protocol was, in my mind, don't exist. What caused it to exist, the need for the frame, the witness of this relationship, because it was so profound and is so profound in the duality of the lower dimensions. And then here's a lexicon pattern that my spiritual guides gave me. Maybe this is a pattern that you can use when you look at numbers, when you look at license plates, phone numbers. Does it speak to you? Does it mean anything to you? Does it have resonance of truth for you? Maybe you are meant to watch this video so you can get your own lexicon key. Feel free to share. I'd love to hear it. Here is basically a number code, a number sequence that helps show me the interconnectedness of conscious sources that we need to create our upper dimensional selves. Maybe you get upper dimensional consciousness without looking at this, without even contemplating it. There's a billion different paths to the same destination. But for me, this really resonates, and it means a lot, and it's been very valuable to me. So maybe it'll be valuable for you as well. And then I just finished off talking about predictable patterns, freedom of consciousness, freedom of choice being very important, but more often than not, I believe we follow the path of the least resistance, maximize pleasure, minimize pain, as hedonists believe. And then I talked about original thoughts and how they might be created. Anyway, I hope this was a wonderfully enlightening video for you. Like I said earlier, like, share, send your love, let's communicate. Much love and many blessings. Good luck in your missions. Have a wonderful day. Namaste. Unconditional love for you, and all that graceful stuff.